The next speaker has been working hard for Palestine. He just hosted Gideon Levy in Reykjavík, discussing the state of affairs. And you all know Gideon Levy. We asked him here to talk about hidden wars, or wars that we don't sort of focus so very much on. And he is a staunch supporter and worker with the Kurdish issue. After that, we'll have a coffee break, okay? This is Ögmundur Jonasson. He's known as the man who kicked out FBI of Reykjavík. He might touch upon that before.
Well, thank you very much. As John said, I'm going to talk about what is hidden and forgotten. And my case study are the Kurds. And I think I will start in an aeroplane last week. I was traveling to Brussels from Copenhagen. I was going to attend a seminar in the European Parliament on the Kurds, the Kurdish question, and the following day, a huge rally in Cologne. 100,000 people, not much mentioned in the media, but nevertheless 100,000 people. Now, next to me in the aeroplane was sitting a young Swedish woman. And she was also going to Brussels, and we started talking. I told her I was going to be discussing the Kurds in Brussels and Cologne. I'm also meeting a Kurd, she said. And who is that? He is my fiancé. And we have been living together in Sweden for the past few years. In December, he was expelled from Sweden, together with many of his friends. He was lucky. He stopped in Brussels. The others were deported to Turkey, where some of them are now already in prison. Why was this? I asked. Well, haven't you heard that Sweden wants to become member of NATO, and they must be clean of the Kurds? So, this is what I'm going to talk about. The war against the Kurds. And I will start with a map, because in 3 or 4 minutes, I promise not more, I will give you a little historical dimension, because the historical dimension is always important. As we are often told, the Ukrainian war started in February 2022 with, quote, the unprovoked Russian invasion. That's the narrative. There's no history. Your history is not there. Gaza started on the 7th of October last year. No history. But now we know that the Jews have a history. The Palestinians have a history. The 5 or 6 million Palestinians living in refugee camps abroad, Rada told us about, they have a history. Ukraine, Donbas has a history. And the Kurds have a history. And now only a few words about the Kurdish history. This is where the Kurds live. In southeastern Turkey, these are the places where they are in majority. Northern Syria, in Iraq and Iran, some in Armenia. and a few in Azerbaijan. Now, this map actually comes from the greatest provider of information in the world, the CIA, but I am using it nevertheless. These are from 2014. Just to give you an indication of the number of Kurds, they are more now, and they always play down these numbers in the CIA offices. In Turkey, 18 million, I would say 20 million in Turkey, 2 million in Syria, Iraq 5 million, 8 million, 10 million I would say in Iran, and 2-3 million abroad. A nation of 50 million people. We don't know how many they are. Now, this is what the map looked like for centuries. When the Ottoman Empire was established, towards the end of the 13th century, until it was dissolved at the end of the First World War. This is from the late 17th century, when the empire was at its strongest. Now, this is what they discussed during the First World War. Sykes-Picot, two gentlemen, one from France, one from Britain, they came to a conclusion. Representatives of the old colonial powers, that the Kurds should have a state. And this resulted in the Treaty of Sèvres in France in 1920. Greece was to get part of Western Turkey, and Kurdistan was there. Not as big as the map I showed you first, but there was a Kurdistan. To power comes Atatürk, Kemal Atatürk, and the Turkish Republic is established in 1922. And this is rejected. And the colonial West accepted that rejection. And in Lausanne in 1923, just over 100 years ago, a treaty was signed without any Kurdistan. But this history the Kurds remember well and are bringing it to life every so often. Now, there have been attempts to establish Kurdish autonomy, of course in Iraq, as we know, but also in Turkey. And in 1978, the Kurdish Workers' Party, the PKK, was established. And it was Abdullah Öcalan who was the leader of the Kurdish Workers' Party, the PKK. Now, he was abducted on the way to South Africa at the beginning of 1999. He was forced to leave Syria, where he had been residing for the last years, or decades, indeed. And first he was taken with open arms in Greece, in Italy, and in Russia. Yeltsin was then in power. He was trying to get friendly with NATO. And even his successor, Vladimir Putin, he also wanted to become a member of NATO in the early years, as some of us know. And they all wanted to take him and welcome Abdullah Öcalan. But then came a word from Washington and NATO. No NATO countries should accept him. Greece rejected, Italy rejected, Russia, outside NATO indeed, rejected. So it was Nelson Mandela who invited him to come to South Africa. Now, who was behind this plot of abduction? There were three intelligence services: Mossad, the Israeli service, intelligence service, the Turkish intelligence service, and the CIA, of course, the CIA. And Abdullah Öcalan was put in prison in the Marmara Sea on an island called İmralı. And there he has been for a quarter of a century. Quarter of a century. Now, peace is more difficult than war, he says. We are not scared as we resist it. We will not be scared when we make peace. These are the new words coming from him in those years from İmralı prison. And there were peace negotiations going on in the years 2013, 2015. And they were so successful, there was such optimism in the air. I could feel it. I was there in Diyarbakir in 2014. I could feel the optimism in the air. And he was allowed to the negotiating table in this period. And as a mark of this optimism, the HDP party, the Kurdish party, was up to around 15% in the votes. This is a picture I took in Diyarbakir in 2014. 1 million people were there. And the message coming from Abdullah Öcalan was this: when oppressed, we fight back. We can handle war. But we can also handle peace, and peace is what we long for. Abdullah Öcalan and the Kurds could handle peace, but Erdogan could not. He lost the majority in the parliamentary elections in June 2015, and then he slammed the door on the Kurds in İmralı prison. And this is taken from a rally in Ankara, October 2015. There was an explosion killing 95 people. Who were in this parade? Kurds. The HDP party organized it, and Kurdish trade unions took part. Who was at fault? Who exploded the bomb? The Kurds. Of course, the Kurds. The Kurds were now terrorists again. And the Minister of Interior at the time, he said, those who resist against the state will have their heads crushed. And there were some similar things happening in Suruk. You remember in connection with Kobani in Rojava, there was an attentat there as well. And of course, it was blamed on the Kurds. So, no more negotiations. And this is what happened afterwards. After a meeting of NATO on the 30th of July 2015, where NATO gave a green light, this is what happened. And this is what I mean by the forgotten war. Because I ask you, did you ever see these pictures on NRK? Or this one? Or this one? Or this one? Did you see these children on NRK? This, I believe, is from Sur. Sur is the ancient city of Diyarbakir, Ahmed, as it is called in Kurdish. Sur was a cultural heritage site, declared such by the United Nations. Never did we hear a single word from the United Nations on the destruction of Sur. 80% of the old city was destroyed. This is from Sur. So I'm saying, well, my message is really this, to show these pictures. that are non-pictures, that the world never saw. This woman, Ace Gökhan, she was a mayor of Reykjavík on the border with Syria. She's a very brave, courageous person who became famous when she stopped the Turkish army going through Reykjavík during the war. And I took this picture on the wall showing the destruction of Old Sur, a UNESCO heritage site. And the institutional world never said anything, nothing, not the United Nations, until we had this. In March 2018, the People's Tribunal in Paris, which is acting in the spirit of Jean-Paul Sartre and Bertrand Russell, they established the People's Tribunal in the early 60s, looking into atrocities committed by dictators in Latin America. Many of you will remember this. They scrutinized what we have been seeing here. And that's another point, or point number two. Point number one I'm making is, are these pictures we never see? Point number two is the silence of the institutional world. Roboski, in the border regions of Turkey and Iraq, this is a bit earlier, 2011. Could be one's mother. And this is from Operation Olive Branch. That is what Erdogan called the attacks on Afrin in 2018 with the following ethnic cleansing, where Kurds, Jews, and Christians were kicked out to make place for ISIS. Abdullah Öcalan, he managed to get this message out of his prison cell in May 2018. 19, I say, because now he's in complete isolation. Nobody sees him, no family, no lawyers, nothing. All in breach of human rights conventions of the Council of Europe, of United Nations. I'm going to read this. There is an urgent need for a method of democratic negotiations away from all kinds of polarization and the culture of conflict in solution problems. We can solve the problems in Turkey and even in the region, first and foremost, the war with soft power, that is with intelligence, political and cultural power instead of tools of physical violence. Needed are constitutional guarantees within the framework of Syria's unity. In the context, there should also be an awareness of Turkey's sensibilities. What is he saying? He is saying, okay, let us look above or forget about boundaries for the time being. Let us sit and negotiate without regard to boundaries. We must understand the sensibilities of Turkey and of Syria, but they must understand that we want our freedom and respect for our human dignity. If we do that, we can sit down and negotiate. But what does NATO say to this? Somebody you know? Ankara has right to defend itself, says NATO chief. He is answering these words. And he gets more specific. Turkey is one of the NATO nations that suffers the most from terrorism. We've just seen the pictures. an important step was taken in the highest court of Belgium I think it was in 2020, where they said that the PKK should not be defined as a terrorist group. And this is, of course, is of high importance, very important indeed. But the Belgian authorities and NATO, they say, well, the Belgian court is all right, but not to be taken seriously on this issue. And this, to finish with, more or less, to show you how the Kurds see the world, they call their land in Turkey Bakur, their land in, or the Kurdish inhabited areas in Iran, Rohilat. That means, I think, the sun coming up in the east, and Basur is Iraq, that's south, and Rojava is west Kurdistan. So I will end by saying that these people do not deserve to be forgotten, but whose is the responsibility? Thank you.